Mourning him after the accident until I discovered the chaos my husband orchestrated was the worst 6 months of my life, crying myself to sleep every night while handling his estate. I was going through his home office to donate his clothes when I found a burner phone taped under his desk drawer with messages to someone named Juniper saying, "The life insurance pays out in 90 days, then I'm coming to get you." I called the number and a woman answered, "Baby, are you finally done playing dead?" My name is Sienna, I'm 32 years old, and until that moment I thought I was a widow. The phone slipped from my fingers, clattering onto Declan's mahogany desk. My husband's desk. My dead husband's desk. Except he wasn't dead at all. The woman on the other end kept talking, her voice bright with anticipation, completely unaware she wasn't speaking to the man she thought she was. "Declan, hello? The connection must be bad. Call me back when you get somewhere with better signal, okay? I can't wait to see you." 90 days felt like forever. But we're almost there, baby. Almost free. I grabbed the phone before she could hang up. This isn't Declan. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. When she finally spoke, her voice had transformed from sugar to ice. "Who is this?" "I'm Sienna, Declan's wife. His widow, actually. Or at least, that's what I've been for the past 6 months while planning his funeral, settling his affairs, and crying myself sick every single night." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Who the hell are you?" She hung up immediately. I stared at the burner phone in my shaking hands, my mind racing to process what I'd just discovered. Declan wasn't dead. My husband of 8 years, the man I'd mourned so deeply I could barely function, had faked his own death to run away with another woman and collect life insurance money. I sank into his leather desk chair, the same chair where he used to work late into the night on what he claimed were important business presentations. How many of those late nights had he actually been planning this? How long had he been messaging this Juniper woman, plotting their escape while I made him dinner and asked about his day? The burner phone's message history told a story that made me physically ill. Months of planning. Detailed discussions about the car accident he would stage. Her reassurances that she'd wait for him, that 90 days would fly by, that the $500,000 life insurance payout would set them up perfectly for their new life together in Costa Rica. There were photos, too. Juniper was younger than me, maybe 25, with the kind of effortless beauty that comes from never having worried about anything substantial in her entire life. Pictures of her in bikinis on beaches I recognized from Declan's supposed business trips. Screenshots of flight confirmations to San Jose. Hotel reservations. Even a photo of a beachfront property they'd apparently already put a deposit on. Using my life insurance money. The policy I'd never wanted him to take out in the first place. I remembered that conversation 2 years ago. Declan had been insistent. "We need to protect each other, Sienna. What if something happens to one of us? The survivor shouldn't have to worry about money on top of everything else." I'd thought it was sweet, responsible even. Now I understood it had been calculated setup for this exact scenario. The staged car accident had been perfect. His car went off a bridge into a river during a rainstorm. They'd found the vehicle, but Declan's body had supposedly been swept away by the current. The police had been sympathetic, explaining that recovery might take weeks or might never happen at all. The medical examiner had eventually issued a death certificate based on the evidence that he'd been in the car when it went over, except he hadn't been. Somehow, my husband had orchestrated an elaborate fake death, complete with official documentation and what I'd thought was a thorough police investigation. The funeral I'd held had been for an empty casket. The grief that had consumed me for 6 months had been for a man who was very much alive, probably laughing with his mistress about how well their plan was working. I scrolled further back in the message history. My hands clenched around the phone when I found messages from the day of the accident. Declan. "It's done. Car's in the river. They'll find it in the morning. Stay calm and stay away for exactly 90 days. Juniper. I'm so proud of you, baby. This is really happening. We're really going to be together. Declan. Just remember, complete radio silence until the insurance pays out. Delete everything. I'll contact you on this number when it's time. Juniper. What about Sienna? Do you think she suspects anything? Declan. Sienna? Please. She's so trusting it's almost boring. She'll mourn me like the devoted little wife she is, collect the insurance money, and never question a thing. By the time she moves on with her life, we'll be long gone. The casual cruelty of those words hit me like a physical blow. Devoted little wife. Boring. So trusting. He'd viewed my love as a weakness to exploit, my loyalty as a character flaw to manipulate. I sat in that office for hours, reading every message, studying every photo, understanding the full scope of their betrayal. They'd planned this for at least 18 months. Juniper had been his administrative assistant at his accounting firm, though he'd told me she'd left for another opportunity months ago. That had been a lie, too. She'd simply gone into hiding to prepare for their new life together. The life insurance company had already approved the claim. The check for $500,000 was being processed and would arrive within the next 2 weeks. In exactly 14 days, Declan planned to come back from the dead, collect his money, and disappear to Costa Rica with the woman he actually loved. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Ivy. "Still coming to dinner tomorrow? You've been isolated too long. You need to start living again." Living again. Ivy had no idea how right she was. I'd been existing in a fog of grief and loss, but that fog had just burned away to reveal a clarity so sharp it could cut. I wasn't going to mourn anymore. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to do something much more productive. I was going to destroy them both. But first, I needed to be smart about this. Declan thought I was trusting and boring, but what he'd failed to realize during our 8 years together was that I paid attention. I noticed things. I remembered details. And I had resources he'd completely underestimated. My father had been a criminal defense attorney before his retirement. My brother worked in insurance fraud investigation. My college roommate was now a private investigator specializing in financial crimes. And I myself worked as a forensic accountant for one of the largest firms in the state. Declan had always been dismissive of my career, calling it number crunching and boring desk work. That boring desk work had taught me exactly how to follow money trails, uncover hidden assets, and document financial crimes with the kind of precision that held up in court. And insurance fraud? That was a federal offense that could result in serious prison time. I took photos of every message on the burner phone. I documented the entire conversation history, the photos, the flight confirmations, everything. Then I carefully returned the phone to its hiding spot under the desk drawer, exactly as I'd found it. Declan would be monitoring it, waiting for the 90-day mark to reach out to Juniper again. He couldn't know I'd discovered his secret. Not yet. My hands were steady now as I texted Ivy back. Definitely coming to dinner. And actually, I'm feeling better than I have in months. I think I'm finally ready to move forward. That wasn't a lie. I was absolutely ready to move forward. Just not in the way anyone expected. I made myself a cup of coffee and returned to Declan's office with my laptop. If my husband wanted to play dead, I was going to let him. In fact, I was going to help him stay dead. Permanently dead. At least to the life he thought he was going to have. Because Declan had made one critical mistake in his elaborate plan. He'd assumed I was too weak, too grief-stricken, too fundamentally trusting to ever question the narrative he'd created. He'd underestimated the woman who'd stood by him through career changes and financial struggles, who'd supported his ambitions and celebrated his successes. That woman was done being underestimated. I pulled up my work contacts and began making a list. I'd need my brother first, to understand the insurance investigation process. Then my friend, the private investigator, to help document Declan's movements over the past 6 months. My father could advise on the legal implications and help me build an airtight case. But most importantly, I needed to time this perfectly. Declan was counting on that insurance payout. He needed it to fund his new life with Juniper. If I exposed him too early, he might disappear before facing consequences. If I waited too long, he might actually succeed in getting away. No, I needed to let him think he'd won. Let him surface to claim his prize. Let him and Juniper believe they'd pulled off the perfect crime. And then, when they were most vulnerable and most confident in their victory, I would take everything from them. Not just the money. Not just their freedom. Everything. My phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification. The insurance company, confirming that the claim had been approved and providing wire transfer details for the payout. $500,000 would be deposited into our joint account in exactly 13 days. I smiled for the first time in 6 months. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who'd just been handed the perfect weapon. Declan thought he was so clever, playing dead and stealing from his boring, trusting wife. But he'd forgotten one crucial detail about the woman he'd married. I didn't just crunch numbers for a living. I hunted people who thought they were smarter than the system. I found the hidden money, uncovered the false trails, and built cases that sent people to prison. And now, I was going to hunt my husband. The next morning, I called my brother Knox at his office. He worked as a senior investigator for the National Insurance Crime Bureau, specializing in life insurance fraud cases. When I told him I needed to see him immediately about a sensitive matter, he cleared his schedule. We met at a coffee shop across town where no one would recognize us. I slid the burner phone across the table to him, along with a USB drive containing all the screenshots I'd taken. Knox's face darkened as he scrolled through the messages. Jesus Christ, Sienna. How long have you known? I found it yesterday. I haven't touched anything except to document it. I kept my voice level, professional. This wasn't the time for emotions. I need to know the best way to handle this. If I go to the police now, can he disappear before they catch him? Knox leaned back in his chair, his investigator's mind already working through scenarios. The problem is, we don't actually know where Declan is right now. He's been declared legally dead, so he's not using his real identity. No credit cards, no bank accounts, nothing traceable. He's essentially a ghost. But he'll surface when the insurance money hits the account, I said. That's in 13 days. Exactly. And that's when we nail him. Knox pulled out his own laptop. But we need to be strategic. Insurance fraud is federal, which means FBI involvement. I can make some calls, but we need ironclad evidence that he's alive and that this was premeditated. The messages show premeditation. They're a start, but defense attorneys will argue the phone could have been planted. The messages fabricated. We need proof of life. Photos, video, financial transactions under whatever alias he's using. Knox studied me carefully. Are you prepared for how ugly this could get? Once we start pulling this thread, there's no going back. He faked his death and let me grieve for 6 months while planning to steal $500,000. My voice came out harder than I intended. I'm not interested in going back. Knox nodded slowly. All right. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to bring in a colleague who specializes in tracking people who've gone underground. We'll find where Declan's been hiding. In the meantime, you need to act completely normal. Go through the motions of moving on with your life. If he's monitoring you somehow, he needs to believe you suspect nothing. What about Juniper? She's easier to track. If she's still in the area, we'll find her. And if she's already wherever Declan is, her movements will lead us to him. Knox started taking notes. Give me everything you know about her. Full name, last known address, any details you can remember. I pulled out my own laptop and opened the file I'd already prepared. Juniper Hayes, 25, worked as Declan's administrative assistant until 8 months ago when she supposedly took a position at another firm. That was a lie. Her last known address was an apartment in the Riverside district, but I checked property records and she's not on the lease anymore. Knox raised an eyebrow. You've been busy. I'm a forensic accountant. This is what I do. I clicked through more files. I also pulled her financial records. Well, the public ones I could access legally. Her bank account shows regular deposits until 8 months ago, then nothing. No employment income, no unemployment benefits, no welfare. Either she's working under the table or someone's supporting her. Declan, Knox said. He's been funneling her money somehow. That's my guess. And if we can prove he's been moving money while legally dead, that's another crime to add to the list. Knox looked at me with something like respect. You've really thought this through. I had a lot of time alone with my grief these past 6 months. Turns out I should have been using it to investigate instead. I closed my laptop. So what's the next step? I'm going to contact my colleague, get surveillance on Juniper if we can locate her, and start building the federal case. You're going to go home, act like the grieving widow who's slowly healing, and wait for my signal. When that insurance money hits your account, we'll be ready. I left the coffee shop feeling more focused than I had in months. The fog of grief had lifted completely, replaced by crystal clear purpose. Declan thought he'd outsmarted everyone, but he'd never anticipated that his boring, trusting wife would turn into his worst nightmare. That afternoon, I met with my friend Mourning, the private investigator. We'd been roommates in college before she'd dropped out to join the police force and eventually start her own investigation firm. Her office was small but efficient, walls covered with caseboards and filing cabinets full of documented betrayals. "I heard about Declan," she said as I walked in. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Don't be. He's not dead." I watched her face transform from sympathy to shock as I explained everything. Mourning was one of those people who didn't waste time on unnecessary emotions. She got angry, got focused, and got to work. "Son of a bitch," she muttered, pulling up her own databases. "You want me to find him?" "I want you to document everything. Every movement, every financial transaction, every interaction with Juniper. I want a timeline so detailed that a jury won't have any reasonable doubt that this was planned from the beginning." Marin's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Give me 48 hours. If he's been anywhere near a camera in the past 6 months, I'll find it." I spent the rest of the week maintaining the carefully constructed facade of my life. I went to work, attended therapy sessions for grief counseling, met Ivy for dinner where I talked about slowly learning to move forward. Everyone commented on how much better I seemed, how the worst of the grief was finally passing. They had no idea I was spending my nights building a case that would send my husband to federal prison. Knox called on day 3. "We found Juniper. She's been living in a beach house in South Carolina, registered under the name Juniper Morrison, paid in cash, 6-month lease that started 7 months ago." "Right when she supposedly left for another job," I said. "Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting. The cash payments? They can be traced back to a series of withdrawals Declan made from your joint savings account in the months before his death. Small amounts, never more than $900 at a time to avoid reporting requirements, but they add up to about $40,000 over 4 months. My hands clenched around the phone. $40,000. Money from our savings, money I'd contributed to, used to set up his mistress while he planned to fake his death. That's financial fraud, too. It gets better. Marin sent over traffic camera footage from a gas station near the beach house. Declan's been there. He's using the name Marcus Webb, but it's definitely him. Different hair color, wearing glasses, but facial recognition software confirms it's a 97% match. When was this? 2 weeks ago. He's been careful, but he's not invisible. We've got him on camera 4 different times now, all within a 5-mile radius of Juniper's beach house. Knox paused. "Sienna, this is enough to move forward with charges. We can arrest him right now." "No." The word came out sharp, decisive. "If you arrest him now, Juniper might not be charged as an accessory. She'll claim she didn't know about the insurance fraud, that she thought he really was dead and came back. I want them both to go down together." "That's risky. If he somehow catches wind of the investigation, he won't. Because in 6 days, the insurance money hits my account, and I'm going to do exactly what Declan expects. I'm going to act like I have no idea he's alive." I'd been planning this part carefully. I'm going to start planning a memorial service, something public to honor his memory. I'll make a big show of finally being ready to say goodbye. It'll feed directly into his ego, make him think his plan worked perfectly. Knox was quiet for a moment. "You're using yourself as bait." "I'm giving him enough rope to hang himself with. There's a difference." "Sienna, Knox, trust me. I know what I'm doing. Just make sure your people are ready to move when I give the signal." I could hear the concern in his voice, but also the respect. "All right, but the second anything feels wrong, you call me. Understood?" "Understood." That night, I drafted a social media post about planning a memorial service for Declan. I included heartfelt words about closure and healing, about honoring his memory properly now that the initial shock of loss had passed. I mentioned that I'd finally received the insurance payout and wanted to use part of it to create a scholarship fund in his name at his alma mater. The post went up at 8 p.m. By 8:30, the burner phone hidden in Declan's desk had a new message. "Juniper. Baby, did you see what she posted? She's planning a memorial service for you, and she's going to donate some of your money to a scholarship fund." I waited, watching the phone. 3 dots appeared, showing Declan was typing. "Declan, calm down. This is actually perfect." She's completely convinced I'm dead. A week from now, we'll have the money and be gone before she even realizes what happened. Juniper. I don't know, baby. Something about this feels weird. Why would she suddenly plan a memorial now? It's been 6 months. Declan. Because that's what boring, predictable people do. They need closure. They need rituals. Stop worrying. Everything is going exactly according to plan. I smiled in the darkness of the office. Yes, Declan. Everything was going exactly according to plan, just not your plan. The insurance money hit my account on a Tuesday morning. $500,000 appeared in my balance with a simple electronic transfer, the culmination of Declan's elaborate scheme and the beginning of his complete destruction. I didn't touch it. Not a single dollar. Instead, I went to work, came home, made dinner for one, and acted like nothing had changed. The memorial service was scheduled for Saturday, 5 days away. I'd rented a beautiful venue, hired caterers, sent invitations to everyone who'd attended the funeral. It would be a celebration of life, I told people, a proper goodbye. Knox called that afternoon. The money's in your account. Declan's going to make contact soon. I know. Marin's team spotted him checking into a hotel about 20 miles from here yesterday. He's using the Marcus Webb alias, paid cash for a week's stay. I kept my voice steady. He's preparing to surface. We've got surveillance on the hotel and on Juniper's location in South Carolina. The FBI is coordinating with us now. They want to move the second he attempts to access that money. No, I said again. Let him think he's succeeded. I want him to actually touch the money, to believe he's gotten away with it. Then take him down. Knox sighed. You're playing a dangerous game. I'm playing the only game that matters. Trust me. That night, I received an email from an unknown address. The subject line read, "We need to talk about your husband." My heart rate spiked as I opened it. The message was brief and to the point. "Mrs. Reed, I have information about your husband's death that you need to hear. Meet me at Riverside Park tomorrow at noon. Come alone. This is not a scam. Your husband is not who you think he is. Someone who knows the truth." I forwarded it immediately to Knox and Marin. Within 10 minutes, they'd traced the IP address to a public library computer. Whoever sent it had been careful to remain anonymous. It could be a trap, Knox warned over the phone. Declan might be testing you, seeing if you suspect anything. Or it could be someone who actually knows something, I countered. Either way, I'm going. Make sure you have people there, watching. The next day, I arrived at Riverside Park at exactly noon. The park was moderately busy with joggers and people walking dogs. I sat on a bench near the fountain, as the email had instructed, and waited. A woman approached after 5 minutes. She was probably in her 40s, dressed in business casual, with the kind of tired eyes that suggested she'd seen too much. She sat down beside me without introduction. "I'm Rebecca," she said quietly. "I worked with Declan at Morrison Financial 3 years ago." My stomach tightened. "Why did you contact me?" "Because I know what kind of man he is, and when I heard about his accident, something didn't sit right." Rebecca stared straight ahead, not looking at me. 3 years ago, Declan tried this exact same scheme with another woman. Her name was Paige. She worked in our office, and he convinced her they were going to fake his death, collect insurance money, and run away together. The world seemed to tilt slightly. "What happened?" "Paige got cold feet at the last minute. She went to the police and told them everything. Declan talked his way out of it, claimed she was a scorned lover making up stories because he'd rejected her. There was no evidence, just her word against his, and he was very convincing. The company quietly let him go to avoid scandal, and he moved on to his next job." "Where he met Juniper," I said softly. Rebecca finally looked at me. "You know?" "I found out a week ago. He staged the car accident, and he's been hiding out with his mistress, waiting for the insurance payout." I studied her carefully. "Why are you telling me this now? Why not go to the police yourself?" "Because I tried that before, and it didn't work. Declan is too smart, too careful. He covers his tracks." She pulled an envelope from her purse. "But I kept copies of everything from the first time. Emails, text messages, recordings of conversations where Paige was trying to convince me to help her get evidence against him. I couldn't use them 3 years ago because Paige backed down and refused to testify. But if you're willing to take him on, if you have actual evidence of him doing this now, then this documentation establishes a pattern of behavior. I took the envelope with shaking hands. Why help me? You don't know me. Because Paige killed herself 2 years ago. Rebecca's voice cracked slightly. The shame of what happened, of no one believing her, of Declan walking away while she lost her job and her reputation, it destroyed her. I couldn't help her then, but maybe I can help you now. After Rebecca left, I sat on that bench for a long time, holding the envelope. Inside was a documentation of Declan's first attempt at this exact scheme. Different woman, different circumstances, but the same calculated cruelty. The same willingness to destroy someone who trusted him. I called Knox immediately. We need to meet, all of us. I just got handed evidence that Declan's done this before. That evening, my living room became an impromptu war room. Knox, Marin, my father, who I'd finally brought into the loop, and a federal prosecutor named Elliot, who'd been assigned to the case. We spread Rebecca's documentation across the coffee table alongside everything we'd already gathered. This changes everything, Elliot said, studying the emails from 3 years ago. This establishes pattern and intent. A jury will see that this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a crime of passion. This is what he does. This is who he is. Can we use Paige's testimony? I asked. I know she's gone, but... The recordings and emails are admissible as evidence of prior bad acts, Elliot explained, and we can potentially locate witnesses from his old job who knew about the situation. Combined with your current evidence, we're building a case for a serial fraudster who's been planning and attempting insurance scams for years. Marin had her laptop open, cross-referencing everything. I've been digging into Declan's financial history. In the year before he met you, he took out 3 different life insurance policies on himself with different companies. All of them lapsed after a few months when he didn't keep up with the premium payments. He was testing the waters, Knox said, seeing how easy it would be to get policies, understanding the payout timelines and investigation processes. And then he met me, I said quietly. Someone stable, with a good job and a trusting nature. The perfect mark. My father, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke. Sienna, this man is dangerous. He's not just a con artist, he's a predator. He finds women, manipulates them, and destroys their lives when he's done with them. You need to be extremely careful. I am being careful. That's why I have all of you. The memorial service was 3 days away. We finalized the plan. I would go through with the service, maintaining the facade completely. Declan would see that I'd received the insurance money and done nothing suspicious with it. He'd believe his plan had worked perfectly. And then, probably within 24 to 48 hours after the memorial, he'd make his move to access the money and disappear. That's when we'd spring the trap. Marin set up additional surveillance around my house and the bank. Knox coordinated with FBI agents who would be ready to move at a moment's notice. Elliot prepared arrest warrants and seizure orders for the money. Everything was in position. On Thursday evening, 2 days before the memorial, I did something I'd been planning since the moment I found the burner phone. I logged into our joint bank account and set up a wire transfer authorization. If anyone tried to transfer more than $10,000 from the account, I would receive an immediate alert on my phone, and the transfer would be delayed by 24 hours pending security verification. Declan wouldn't know about this security feature, and when he tried to grab the money and run, that 24-hour delay would be just enough time for law enforcement to track the transfer and freeze it before it left the country. The burner phone buzzed that night with new messages. Juniper. The memorial is in 2 days. Are you really going to let her go through with it? It feels cruel, baby. Declan. It's perfect. She's so convinced I'm dead that she's spending money on a memorial service. After Saturday, she'll be too emotionally drained to pay attention to the bank account for a few days. That's our window. Juniper. I'm nervous. What if something goes wrong? Declan. Nothing will go wrong. I've planned every detail. By this time next week, we'll be in Costa Rica, and Sienna will still be crying over my empty casket. I took screenshots of everything, added them to the evidence file, and went to bed. 2 more days. Just 2 more days of pretending, of playing the role of the grieving widow one final time. And then I would show Declan exactly what happened when you underestimated your boring, trusting wife. Friday morning, I received flowers at work. A large bouquet of white lilies with a card that read, "Thinking of you during this difficult time. Tomorrow will be hard, but you'll get through it. You're stronger than you know." The message was signed "A Friend," but I recognized the handwriting. It was from Rebecca. She was watching, supporting me from a distance, hoping that this time justice would actually be served. I put the flowers on my desk and got back to work on the final preparations. The memorial would be perfect. The trap would be set. And Declan's arrogance would be his downfall. That evening, I tried on the black dress I'd bought for the memorial service. It was elegant, appropriate, exactly what a loving widow would wear. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. 6 months ago, I'd been broken, shattered by grief and loss. Now I was something else entirely. I was dangerous. The memorial service was exactly what Declan would have expected. Tasteful, emotional, and completely convincing. Over 100 people attended, filling the elegant venue I'd rented. Colleagues from both our workplaces, neighbors, friends from college, even some of Declan's extended family who'd made the trip. I played my part perfectly. I gave a speech about the man I thought I'd married, about loss and memory and learning to move forward. I accepted condolences with grace, thanked people for coming, and maintained the image of a woman who'd finally found a measure of peace with her grief. What no one except my team knew was that Knox sat in the back row, Marin monitored from a van outside, and 2 FBI agents were stationed at various points around the venue. Every attendee had been photographed as they entered. Every car in the parking lot had been documented. We were waiting to see if Declan would be arrogant enough to attend his own memorial. He didn't show. But halfway through the service, Marin texted me a photo. A man in a dark suit and sunglasses, standing across the street from the venue, partially obscured by a tree. The facial recognition software identified him with 89% certainty as Declan. He'd come to watch, to see the culmination of his handiwork, to witness his boring, trusting wife mourning him publicly while he prepared to disappear with her money. I looked down at my phone, saw that distant figure watching the memorial service for a man who wasn't dead, and felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Not anger. Not anymore. This was beyond anger. This was anticipation. The service ended at 3 p.m. People lingered, sharing stories and memories, offering final words of comfort. I accepted them all graciously, even hugged Declan's mother who cried on my shoulder about losing her son too soon. The lies upon lies were suffocating, but I maintained my composure. By 5 p.m., everyone had left. I stood alone in the empty venue, surrounded by flowers and condolence cards and photographs of a man who was very much alive. I sent a text to my team. He was there, he watched, now we wait. The attack came that night. I was home having changed out of my memorial dress into comfortable clothes, when my phone buzzed with the bank alert I'd been expecting. Someone was attempting to wire transfer $400,000 from our joint account to an offshore bank in the Cayman Islands. I called Knox immediately. He's making his move. We see it. The transfer has been flagged and delayed as planned. FBI is mobilizing now. I could hear urgency in Knox's voice. Where are you? Home, safe. All the security measures are in place. I'd had a security system installed earlier in the week, along with cameras covering every entrance to my house. I'm not going anywhere. Good. Stay inside. Keep the doors locked. We're tracking the transfer origin now. I watched through my security camera feed as 2 black SUVs pulled up outside my house 20 minutes later. FBI agents in tactical gear emerged, setting up a perimeter. Knox arrived in his own vehicle along with Marin and Elliot, the prosecutor. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered on speaker so everyone gathered in my living room could hear. Sienna? Declan's voice after 6 months of silence sent ice through my veins. We need to talk. I let shock and confusion color my voice. Who is this? This isn't funny. It's me. It's Declan. I know this is hard to process, but I need you to listen very carefully. Knox was already tracing the call. Marin had her recording equipment running. I kept my voice trembling, uncertain. Declan is dead. Whoever this is a cruel joke. I'm not dead, Sienna. The accident was staged. I'm alive, and I'm sorry for what I put you through, but there are people after me. Dangerous people. I had to disappear to protect both of us. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. This was his backup plan if something went wrong. Play the victim, claim he'd been protecting me, manipulate my emotions one more time. I don't understand, I whispered. Where have you been? Why didn't you tell me? I couldn't risk putting you in danger, but now I need your help. There's been a problem with the insurance money. Someone's trying to steal it, and I need you to authorize the transfer before they can block it. What transfer? I don't know what you're talking about. Check your bank alerts. You should have received a notification about a wire transfer. I need you to approve it right now. Every second we wait, we're at risk. Knox shook his head firmly. Keep him talking. He mouthed. Declan, I'm so confused. You're alive? Really alive? Why should I trust this isn't some kind of scam? I let my voice break convincingly. I buried you. I mourned you. How do I know this is real? Because I'm the only one who knows that you have a birthmark on your left shoulder blade in the shape of a crescent moon. Because I know that you're terrified of thunderstorms because of something that happened when you were 7. Because I know you, Sienna, and I'm begging you to trust me one more time. Personal details only my husband would know. It would have been convincing if I didn't already know the truth. Where are you? Can I see you? I asked. Silence on the other end. Then, not yet. It's not safe. But if you approve this transfer, I can use the money to pay off the people threatening us, and then we can be together again. Isn't that what you want? I want my husband back, I said truthfully. The statement had layers of meaning he couldn't understand. Then help me. Go to your laptop, log into the bank account, and approve the transfer. Do it now, Sienna, please. Knox was holding up his phone. They'd traced the call. Declan was calling from a burner phone at a gas station 15 miles away. FBI units were already en route. Okay, I said, my voice small and compliant. Okay, I'll do it. Just tell me what to click. I could hear the relief in Declan's voice as he walked me through the steps to supposedly approve the transfer. I followed his instructions exactly, clicking through screens on my laptop while the team watched. But what Declan didn't know was that I wasn't actually approving anything. Each click was taking me deeper into the bank's security protocols, creating a digital trail of his attempted theft that would be ironclad in court. Good, Declan said when I reached the final screen. Now click the green authorize button. I see it, I lied. But Declan, before I do this, I need to know something. Who's Juniper? The silence that followed was absolute. I could practically hear his mind racing, trying to figure out how I knew that name. Who told you about Juniper? His voice had changed, the mask of concern slipping. You did. In all those messages you left on the burner phone taped under your desk drawer. The one where you talked about playing dead and running away with her to Costa Rica. The one where you called me boring and trusting and too stupid to figure out what you were doing. More silence. Then, in a voice filled with cold fury, you knew. This whole time, you knew. I found out a week ago, actually. And you're right about one thing. I am thorough. Boring, maybe. But definitely thorough. Which is why the FBI is currently listening to this call, why they've traced your location, and why they're about 3 minutes away from arresting you. I heard movement on his end, the sound of a car door slamming. You bitch! You set me up! No, Declan. I just refuse to be your victim. There's a difference. I kept my voice steady. Did you really think you could fake your death, steal $500,000, and destroy my life without consequences? I gave you 8 years, he snarled. 8 years of my life pretending to love you, playing the devoted husband. You were supposed to be grateful for the insurance payout and move on. You were supposed to be too weak to fight back. I was never weak. You just mistook kindness for weakness, trust for stupidity, love for blindness. I looked at the FBI agents in my living room, saw Knox give me a thumbs-up signal. They have you, Declan. There's nowhere to run. This isn't over. The call cut off abruptly. Through the phone line, I heard shouting, the sound of police commands. And then silence. Knox's phone rang. He answered, listened, then gave me a grim smile. They got him. Declan's in custody. And they picked up Juniper at the same time in South Carolina. Coordinated arrests. I sat down slowly, my legs suddenly unsteady. It was done. Actually done. After all the planning, all the evidence gathering, all the careful manipulation, Declan was finally facing consequences for his actions. Elliot was already on his phone, coordinating with the agents on site. They're bringing them both in for processing. With the attempted wire fraud we just recorded, the documented insurance fraud, and the evidence of conspiracy, we're looking at multiple federal charges. Plus, the prior attempted fraud with Page establishes pattern. This is going to be a slam dunk prosecution. Marin came over and hugged me tightly. You did it? You actually did it. We did it, I corrected. I couldn't have done this without all of you. My father, who'd been watching from the corner with barely contained rage throughout the whole phone call, finally spoke. I'm proud of you, Sienna. You turned your pain into power. That takes real strength. The next several hours were a blur of official statements, evidence documentation, and legal procedures. I gave my formal statement to the FBI, handed over all the physical evidence, including the burner phone, and signed authorization forms for them to access all the financial records I'd compiled. At midnight, Knox drove me back to my house. We sat in his car for a moment, watching the last FBI vehicle pull away from my curb. What happens now? I asked. Now, they'll be arraigned, probably Monday. Bail will be set extremely high given the flight risk and the offshore accounts we've documented. Elliot will formally charge them with conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, wire fraud, identity fraud, and about 6 other federal crimes. The trial will probably be scheduled for 6 to 8 months from now. And they'll be convicted? Knox looked at me with absolute certainty. With the evidence we have, they don't stand a chance. Declan's going to federal prison for a long time. Juniper, too, as his accomplice. Their lives as they knew them are over. I nodded slowly, letting that truth settle in. Declan had wanted to destroy my life and start fresh with someone new. Instead, he'd destroyed his own life and dragged his mistress down with him. Thank you, I said quietly. For believing me, for helping me. You didn't need much help, Knox replied. You're one of the most formidable people I know, Sienna. Declan never stood a chance against you. He just didn't know it until it was too late. The arraignment on Monday was everything I'd hoped for and more. Declan and Juniper were brought in separately, both in orange jumpsuits, both looking significantly less confident than they had in their Costa Rica beach photos. The courtroom was packed with reporters, alerted to the case by a carefully timed press release about an elaborate insurance fraud scheme. I sat in the gallery with my father on one side and Knox on the other. When Declan was let in, his eyes found mine immediately. The hatred in his gaze was pure and undiluted, but beneath it I could see something else. Fear. Real fear. The charges were read aloud. Conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, wire fraud, identity fraud, making false statements to federal agents, and theft by deception. Combined, they carried a maximum sentence of 35 years in federal prison. Declan's attorney, a public defender who'd clearly been handed an impossible case, tried to argue for reasonable bail. Elliot demolished that argument in under 3 minutes, presenting evidence of offshore accounts, established flight risk based on the staged death, and the defendant's clear willingness to disappear permanently. Bail was denied. Declan would remain in custody until trial. Juniper's arraignment followed, and she was charged as an accomplice to all the same crimes, plus conspiracy to commit money laundering for her involvement in setting up the Costa Rica accounts. Her attorney tried to paint her as a naive young woman manipulated by an older, more sophisticated criminal. Elliot produced the text messages where Juniper had actively participated in planning the fraud, had researched the insurance payout timeline, and had explicitly discussed how to hide the money once they received it. The naive victim narrative collapsed immediately. She too was denied bail. As they were led out of the courtroom, Juniper tried to catch my eye, her expression pleading. I looked right through her. She'd known exactly what she was doing when she helped Declan fake his death. She'd known I was grieving, suffering, and she'd enjoyed it. The messages between them had been full of mocking comments about my tears, my pain, my genuine loss. There would be no sympathy from me. Not now, not ever. Over the next few weeks, more details emerged that made the situation even worse for them. Marin's investigation uncovered that Declan had actually attempted this scheme once before, even before the Paige situation Rebecca had told me about. 8 years ago, with a woman named Vera who'd been too frightened to go to the police. Vera had agreed to speak to prosecutors now, adding another layer of evidence showing Declan's pattern of predatory behavior. The media coverage was extensive. Serial fraudster caught by wife. He tried to destroy, read one headline. Woman turns grief into justice, exposing husband's fake death, read another. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with interview requests, book deal offers, podcast invitations. I declined them all. This wasn't about fame or publicity. This was about justice. The trial was scheduled for October, 6 months away. In the meantime, I had to rebuild my life. The money from the insurance company had been frozen as evidence, but my lawyer assured me it would be released back to me once the trial concluded, and Declan was convicted. The insurance company was actually grateful that I'd uncovered the fraud before the money could leave the country. I returned to work full-time, throwing myself into cases with renewed focus. My colleagues knew the basic outline of what had happened, and they were supportive but respectful of my privacy. I appreciated that more than they knew. One afternoon in June, 3 months before the trial, I received a letter from the correctional facility where Declan was being held. He wanted to speak with me. The letter was carefully worded, claiming he wanted to apologize, to explain, to help me understand why he'd done what he'd done. I showed it to Elliot immediately. "It's a trap," he said without hesitation. "He wants to manipulate you, see if he can convince you to soften your testimony or show mercy to the jury. Classic abuser behavior." "I know," I replied. "But can I send a response?" Elliot raised an eyebrow. "What kind of response?" I drafted a single sentence and had it delivered through official channels. "I hope every day in prison gives you time to think about the life you destroyed and the woman you underestimated." According to the guards, Declan destroyed his cell after receiving that message. Good. Let him rage in impotence. Let him finally understand what it felt like to be powerless. Juniper tried a different approach. She had her attorney reach out to mine with a plea deal offer. If I agreed to testify that she'd been manipulated by Declan, that she was a victim too, they'd agree to a reduced sentence. I refused immediately. The text messages showed a willing, active participant who'd enjoyed every moment of the deception. She wasn't a victim. She was a co-conspirator who'd happily helped destroy my life for money, and a man who'd already proven he was willing to discard women when they were no longer useful. In July, Rebecca contacted me again. "I heard about the trial date. I wanted you to know that Paige's parents are willing to testify about what happened to their daughter, about how Declan's first fraud attempt destroyed her life. They want to make sure he can't hurt anyone else. The trial was already strong, but this additional testimony would seal it completely. The prosecution would show that Declan wasn't just a man who made one mistake. He was a serial predator who'd been refining this scheme for over a decade, leaving destroyed lives in his wake." I met with Paige's parents in August. They were broken people, still grieving their daughter years after her death. When I told them about Declan's conviction being insured, about how he'd spend decades in prison paying for what he'd done, I saw something shift in their eyes. Not closure, exactly, but a sense that their daughter's suffering might finally mean something. "Thank you," Paige's mother said, gripping my hands. "Thank you for being strong enough to fight back, for making sure he couldn't do this to anyone else." The trial began on October 15th. The courthouse was packed with spectators and media. I took the stand on day 3, and for 6 hours I detailed exactly what Declan had done. I showed the jury the burner phone messages, explained how I discovered his plan, described the 6 months of grief I'd endured while he was alive and laughing with his mistress. I told them about the $40,000 he'd stolen from our savings, about the elaborate staging of his death, about his willingness to let me suffer indefinitely while he started a new life. Declan's attorney tried to cross-examine me, to poke holes in my story or make me seem vindictive. I answered every question calmly and precisely, referencing specific evidence, dates, and documentation. Years of working as a forensic accountant had taught me how to present complex information clearly and withstand aggressive questioning. By the time I stepped down from the witness stand, the jury looked at Declan with undisguised disgust. Juniper's testimony didn't help their case. She tried to claim ignorance, to say she hadn't known about the insurance fraud until it was too late. The prosecutor played her text messages where she'd explicitly discussed the insurance payout timeline and how to hide the money. She broke down crying, which might have been effective if the jury hadn't already seen the messages where she'd mocked my grief. The defense tried to paint Declan as a man who'd made a desperate mistake, who'd been under financial pressure and had made a bad decision. The prosecution countered with evidence of the 2 previous fraud attempts, with testimony from Vera and Paige's parents, with financial records showing Declan had been planning this for years. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. I watched Declan's face as the word was repeated for each charge. Guilty, guilty, guilty. The mask he'd worn throughout the trial cracked completely, revealing the rage and entitlement beneath. He started shouting, had to be restrained by bailiffs, was dragged from the courtroom still screaming threats. Juniper simply collapsed, sobbing. No one moved to comfort her. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. I submitted a victim impact statement that detailed exactly how Declan's actions had affected my life. Not just the emotional trauma of grieving someone who wasn't dead, but the financial manipulation, the betrayal of trust, the months of therapy I'd needed, the sense of safety I'd lost. The judge gave Declan 28 years in federal prison. Juniper received 12 years as an accomplice. Both would be required to pay restitution, though they had no assets left after legal fees and seized accounts. As they were led away to begin their sentences, neither of them looked at me. I was glad. I had nothing left to say to either of them. 2 years after Declan's conviction, I stood in my new home office, a bright space with large windows overlooking a garden I'd planted myself. The house was mine, purchased with money I'd earned and saved. The insurance payout had eventually been released to me after the trial concluded, and I'd put most of it into a trust fund that provided support for families dealing with insurance fraud. The rest I'd used to start a consulting business helping people untangle complex financial frauds. Turned out there was significant demand for a forensic accountant who understood both the technical and emotional aspects of betrayal. My client list was full, and I'd hired 2 associates to help manage the workload. Ivy came over most Sundays for brunch. Tyler, a kind man I'd met through a friend's introduction, had become a steady presence in my life. We were taking things slowly, rebuilding my capacity for trust one honest conversation at a time. He knew my story, had never pressured me, and showed me through consistent actions what a healthy relationship could look like. I occasionally received letters from Declan, forwarded through my attorney. I never opened them. Whatever he had to say, I didn't need to hear it. His opinion, his justifications, his attempts at manipulation no longer had any power over me. Juniper wrote once, about a year into her sentence. Her letter was forwarded by Knox with a note. Thought you should know, she tried. I read it out of curiosity. It was full of apologies and excuses, claiming she'd been young and stupid, that Declan had manipulated her, that she'd learned her lesson and hoped I could forgive her someday. I burned it without responding. She hadn't been that young, and the text messages showed exactly how willing a participant she'd been. Some actions didn't deserve forgiveness, and I had no interest in providing absolution to someone who'd actively enjoyed my suffering. Rebecca became a friend, one of the unexpected gifts from the whole horrible experience. We met for coffee monthly, sharing updates on our lives, and occasionally discussing cases where we could help other fraud victims. She'd testified at Declan's trial about Paige, finally getting the justice she'd wanted 3 years earlier. It hadn't brought Paige back, but it had prevented Declan from destroying anyone else. My relationship with my family had strengthened through the ordeal. Knox and I were closer than we'd ever been. My father had retired and volunteered at a legal aid clinic, helping people navigate the justice system. He said watching me fight back had reminded him why he'd become an attorney in the first place. The media coverage had eventually died down, replaced by newer stories and fresher scandals. I was grateful for the return to privacy, for the ability to rebuild without constant scrutiny. On the third anniversary of finding the burner phone, I did something I'd been planning for months. I created a scholarship fund in Paige's name at her alma mater, specifically for women studying criminal justice or forensic accounting. Her parents cried when I told them about it, and we stood together at the announcement ceremony as the first recipient was awarded. "This is what I wanted," Paige's mother told me afterward, "for something good to come from all that pain. For her story to help other women fight back." I still went to therapy, working through the layers of trauma that didn't disappear just because justice had been served. Trust issues, hypervigilance, occasional nightmares about being trapped and helpless. But I was healing, genuinely healing, in ways that wouldn't have been possible if I'd simply accepted Declan's betrayal as my fate. The last update I received about Declan came from Knox, who monitored the federal prison system reports. Declan had been denied parole at his first hearing, with the board citing his lack of genuine remorse and continued attempts to manipulate prison staff. He'd have another chance in 5 years, but given his pattern of behavior, Knox didn't think he'd ever be released early. 28 years. Declan would be 63 when he got out. His youth, his opportunities, his freedom all sacrificed for a scheme that had ultimately given him nothing but a prison cell. Juniper would be released when she was 39, her entire 30s lost to incarceration. I didn't waste energy wondering what kind of person she'd be when she got out. That was her problem to solve, not mine. I dated Tyler for a year before he proposed, and I took 3 months to say yes. Not because I didn't love him, but because I needed to be absolutely certain I was saying yes for the right reasons, that I was choosing him from a place of strength and clarity, not fear or loneliness. We married in a small ceremony with close friends and family. No elaborate memorial services or performances of grief. Just honest vows and genuine commitment between two people who saw each other clearly. On my wedding day, I wore the necklace my grandmother had given me before she died. "For strength," she'd said when she clasped it around my neck. She'd survived her own betrayals, her own battles, and she'd wanted me to know I had that same resilience in me. She'd been right. As I stood next to Tyler, promising to honor and respect each other, I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years earlier, the one who'd believed her husband was dead, who'd grieved a lie, who'd been considered boring and trusting by a man who'd tried to destroy her. That woman had found her strength not despite the betrayal, but because of it. She'd learned that being underestimated was sometimes the greatest advantage. That kindness didn't mean weakness, and that trust, when violated, could be transformed into determination that was absolutely unstoppable. I never heard from Declan again. Somewhere in a federal prison, he was serving out his sentence, finally facing consequences for the lives he'd destroyed. I didn't waste time thinking about him, or wondering if he'd changed. Some people were fundamentally broken, and all the prison time in the world wouldn't fix them. But I wasn't broken. I'd been bent, tested, pushed to my limits, and I'd come out stronger on the other side. The last thing I did before moving into my new house with Tyler was donate Declan's desk to a charity auction. The burner phone had long since been entered into evidence and locked away in a federal facility, but the desk itself still carried memories I didn't want in my home. Someone bought it for $300, probably never knowing the role it had played in exposing one of the most elaborate insurance fraud schemes in recent history. I hoped they got more honest use out of it than its previous owner had. 6 months after my wedding, I received notice that the Victim Restitution Fund had been activated. Declan and Juniper were required to pay a small amount each month from their prison wages toward the debt they owed me. The actual amount was negligible, maybe $20 a month combined, but the symbolism mattered. Every month for the next 28 years, Declan would be reminded of what he'd lost. Every month he'd make a payment toward the debt he could never fully repay. Every month he'd be confronted with the evidence of his failure. I didn't need the money, but I accepted it anyway, and donated it to the scholarship fund in Paige's name. Turned out Declan was funding the education of women studying to become exactly the kind of professionals who would catch people like him. The irony was perfect. 5 years after finding the burner phone, I was invited to speak at a conference on financial fraud detection. I almost declined, but Tyler encouraged me to share my story if I felt ready. So I stood on that stage and told a room full of fraud investigators, attorneys, and law enforcement professionals exactly how I'd caught my husband. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of people approached me afterward with their own stories of financial betrayal, asking for advice, sharing their victories and their ongoing battles. I realized that my experience, as painful as it had been, had given me something valuable to offer others. I never would have chosen this path. If someone had told me on my wedding day that my husband would try to fake his death and steal from me, I would have laughed at the absurdity. But life rarely asks permission before breaking us, before testing us, before forcing us to discover exactly how strong we can be. Declan had thought he was the clever one, the mastermind who could manipulate his boring wife and get away with it. He'd underestimated me completely, and that underestimation had been his fatal mistake. I'd turned his weapon against him, used his arrogance, his confidence, his certainty that I was too weak to fight back. I'd let him think he'd won right up until the moment the trap closed around him. And I'd done it all without ever becoming the kind of person he was. I'd sought justice, not revenge. I'd used legal means, gathered evidence, followed proper procedures. I'd been angry, furious even, but I'd channeled that fury into methodical destruction of his schemes, rather than becoming cruel or vindictive myself. The woman Declan had called boring had outsmarted him at every turn. The woman he'd called trusting had anticipated his every move. The woman he'd thought he could discard had become the architect of his complete downfall. On quiet evenings, sitting in my garden with Tyler, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I sometimes thought about those 6 months of grief. How real the pain had been, how genuine my loss. How I'd cried myself to sleep night after night, mourning a man who was alive and laughing about my suffering. I didn't regret those tears. They'd been honest emotion, the natural response to perceived loss. What I regretted was every year I'd spent with someone who'd viewed me as nothing more than a useful tool in his schemes. But even that regret was fading, because those years had taught me what I wouldn't tolerate, what red flags to watch for, what genuine love actually looked like when compared to manipulation. Declan had tried to destroy me and failed spectacularly. In trying to take everything from me, he'd lost everything himself. His freedom, his future, his opportunities, all gone. Locked away in a federal prison where he'd spend the next 2 decades watching his life waste away. Meanwhile, I was thriving, building a business, maintaining genuine relationships, creating a life based on honesty and authentic connection. Everything he'd tried to steal from me had been replaced by something better, something real. The final irony was that if Declan had simply divorced me honestly, he would have been free. We would have split our modest assets, gone our separate ways, and he could have pursued his relationship with Juniper without any of this. It would have hurt, certainly, but it would have been survivable. Instead, his greed and his arrogance had led him to orchestrate an elaborate fraud that had destroyed his life completely. He'd gotten exactly what he deserved, and I'd made sure of it. Justice, I'd learned, wasn't always swift. But when it finally arrived, when you'd built your case with care and patience and precision, it was absolutely devastating to those who thought they'd escaped it. Declan had called me boring. He'd been wrong. I was methodical, thorough, and absolutely relentless when it came to protecting what mattered. He just hadn't realized that until it was far too late.